Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday show. You hear that music, you know Mike-Guardia is joining us. He is on our show every first Monday, and today we get to air live. We love this. We do a lot of pre-records, but we're doing a lot more live shows this year, especially with our anniversary. And Mike-Guardia is on our Big Blend Radio show every first Monday. He is an award-winning and internationally recognized military historian and author. And he is joining us today to talk about his brand new book that was just released this weekend. We've talked about it on probably the last, 2, 3, 4 shows. We've been waiting for it, and we keep waiting and waiting because he's now the author, I think, of 22 books now. It's gone up. His new book is The-Combat-Diaries, True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II. So I encourage you to go check it out on Amazon. Go to his website, Mike-Guardia.com. But welcome back. How are you, Mike?
Hey, ladies, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, it is good to have you back. I do want to tell everybody and you that we are airing live from a small town in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State known as Ilwaco. I'm trying to get this right. Ilwaco? It's Ilwaco. Ilwaco, yeah. And we're across from a firehouse, and we have a firehouse dog because her name's Ember, right? So anything could happen during the show since we're live. So if anything goes off, that's what's going on, but we'll try to protect your ears. But, Mike, I think it's really pretty cool that Nancy and I are in the Pacific Northwest, and we've been traveling through here the last couple months. And we're seeing more and more World War II history, specifically on the ocean front. You know, a lot of the, the memorials are different. On our way here, we talked last month about the POW camps we've experienced in the Southwest, but all of a sudden here we're seeing bits of submarine. We're seeing veterans that were at sea here. So I think it's kind of fitting that we're talking about combat diaries and World War II because you kind of forget it, and all of a sudden you're walking on this. This is such a beautiful coastal area. It's dramatic. I don't even understand how they were doing stuff out here with all the rocks and how this is not an easy ocean out here. What were they doing out here? Like, seriously. I mean, were they watching out? I mean, what was going on in World War II here in the Pacific Northwest?
All righty. So let's see. In the Pacific Northwest, you had a lot of activity that was happening at Fort Lewis, Washington. That was one of the primary hubs for soldiers that were going to the Pacific and coming from the Pacific. As a matter of fact, there is one story in the Combat Diaries of a particular gentleman who was with his unit, and they were doing their pre-mobilization training at Fort Lewis before they headed out to the Philippines. And ironically enough, they landed in the Philippines only a few months before the Japanese invaded. So you had a lot of activity going on in Fort Lewis. And there was also, I think, a high priority defense of the area because there was Japanese activity within the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, and and the War Department saw this as a critical crossroads. They said, okay, well, if the Japanese have been as mobile across the Pacific as we've seen over the past few years, and they've already gotten a toehold on the Aleutian Islands, well, their next most likely course of action would be to, establish a foothold within Puget Sound or anywhere within the Pacific anywhere within the Pacific Northwest, and that's why there was a big priority defense on that part of the country, and really throughout the entire West Coast, for that matter, because very early on, a lot of folks within the War Department were saying to themselves and telling any decision maker who would listen, well, look, if Pearl Harbor was the first target, don't be surprised if San Francisco or L.A. become the next targets.
Oh, wow. So we're looking at it that way. So that's where it kind of like, okay, we need to all like bunker down. And so I think, because, we've talked about that even in Central California, where we've seen even out on the farms, like, away from the coast with watchtowers. So did they start doing more of the watchtowers? And I mean, even all the nuclear warheads, was all of that around that time frame? Was that all kind of after Pearl Harbor, or were they just protective at the beginning?
Well, I mean, if we're talking in terms of nuclear warheads, I mean, that came quite a ways after.
Okay.
You know, if we're looking strictly from the standpoint of building watchtowers, that was something that started in the 1940s. You know, I mean, and well, I actually shouldn't say it started in the 1940s. It just started to reach critical mass at that point. But you know, building coastal defenses was a long part of our military tradition. And every so often, you would have these reinforced coastal artillery batteries, and you would also have a series of watch stations that would be able to relay information to a coastal battery, or you know, act as a relay station to any one of those civil defense assets that we had.
Isn't one of the strategies that our government has and has always had is, okay, we might go to war, but keep it on somebody else's place, somebody else's terrain, don't come here? Like, we're building our defenses so strong that if you come into our territory, you're going to be gone before you even think twice, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, well, you know, I think all things considered, we've always preferred to keep the war abroad. But, you know, we've always erred on the side of caution, too, saying, well, you know, we can't guarantee that the oceans on either side of us are going to keep the enemies from reaching our shores. So if they do, you know, we need to have some type of system in place to say, okay, well, you know, we have these identifiable routes of egress, and, you know, we have all of these designated fallback points for any of our local militias. And then we have each one of these divisions that are stationed at our stateside bases. How quickly can they mobilize from their point of origin to a critical juncture to stop the enemy's advance?
This is interesting because I know you've also written American Armor in the Pacific, which we've covered a few times in different stories and ways, and you've also done it on the East. You know, air war on the Eastern Front. You've covered World War II quite a bit, and there's also Aracourt, the 1944, that book too, the Battle of Aracourt. So when you were doing the Combat Diaries, because these are stories of veterans, and I think this is a really important thing we should touch on. You know, we're at that change of guard, should we say? You know, there's generations are moving on, and you were able to get these stories. Did all the research you did in writing your other books help you for the Combat Diaries in regards to, you know, setting the scene and understanding what these men went through in, you know, on the front lines?
Oh, absolutely it did. Yeah, you know, I think what I have learned over time with all of the books that I've researched and written is that, you know, in order to tell a story effectively, I think I really have to tell it from the perspective of the human element, you know, and what I've wanted all of my readers to take away from each one of the stories that I've written about is that war is never truly a clinical pursuit, you know, and it really can't be told from a bird's eye view in a parochial sense that, okay, you had this battle on this particular day where this unit fought this unit and X amount of lives were lost, and it was of a strategic critical importance because of reasons X, Y, and Z. I really want them to understand that, you know, whenever war is pursued, it's never pursued in clinical terms. There's always going to be a human element to it, and each one of those living, breathing persons on the front line brings a unique perspective. They can all agree on the facts of what happened and, you know, the hard data, but their interpretations and their analyses and how they perceive the action happening in front of them is really what adds a richer dimension to the narrative, and also shows you in a broader sense that, you know, when you do send people into harm's way, this is how they deal with the trauma that's happening right in front of them. And this is what they take with them going forward after the conflict ends.
I think that's a really important point, because I know from when I was in school and reading history books, I thought history was the most boring thing ever because of the way it was presented. It was, oh, here's your timeline and your dates and 2 sentences about each thing. And like, how can you sum up a war, a global war, in 2 sentences? Please. There's got to be more to that story. And I mean, really, the textbooks were so dry and boring that I really just didn't care. When I got out,
you needed Mike. You needed military Mike as your teacher.
and well, it's true. And then when you start going to libraries, not being told to, and you go on your own and you ask the librarian for something, then you get the real stuff.
Oh, I love librarians.
And I'm not talking about schools today, so I don't need a bunch of emails. I'm talking about schools how history was taught. I mean, I remember these mimeograph sheets, and it was the date in 2 sentences for a war when so many hundreds of people got killed. And that's what they got, 2 sentences in purple ink on a piece of paper. Mike, no, that can't.
I can smell that sheet of paper too.
Yeah,
I remember I had that in school too.
And exactly. And so, I mean, history is so important, so we don't keep making the same mistakes. So I would like to see history presented in the fashion that you've written it, like the real stories, and make the people because they were people with feelings and families. And I get really get carried away.
No, but it's true. But I think, but that's the thing. I think we talk about this every time you're on the show about your writing, that you really you get us to understand what a soldier has gone through, whether it's a man or a woman. You really get us to understand this sacrifice, the push through. I mean, even in this book, you have stories. You always get these stories where when I say go rogue, it's just because of your book titles too. But it's like there are soldiers in these stories where they didn't even wait for a command, that they saved a troop and got home because they jumped and did something. They thought forward and acted. And I think when World War II, can we back up a little bit about this? Because we had World War I, World War II. I mean, how ready were we as a country in America for World War II? The training seemed, just reading their stories, the training did not seem like fun, and you had a lot of people enlisting from all walks of life that really said, we have to stand up and do something. So boot camp didn't sound fun to me from some of the stories I was reading. It's like, and yet they go from that to, it seemed like a fast, well, your book reads really fast, yet you're really touched and connected with the person you're writing about. Each story, it's a collection of all these stories, but it seems like going into World War II, there was some knowledge from World War I, but at the same time, these soldiers they went for it. No matter what their background, they went for it. And boot camp was hardcore. They did get some training, but it was still a very much a matter of thinking on your own once you got out there in some circumstances.
Right. And that is what so many of our veterans were faced with at the time. They really had a slapdash training program, and even though it was rigorous, we were still working against a lot of years of atrophy because, we didn't have the priority defense dollars that we needed. We didn't have the priority equipment that we needed. So it was probably the biggest sense of trial and error with the biggest sense of urgency that was attached to it. And the fact that they were able to improvise, adapt, and overcome in the manner that I did is really just nothing short of a miracle. I was going through all of these oral histories, and even as I was interviewing some of these veterans, I just kept thinking to myself, I mean, my God, what an incredible testament to your resourcefulness and your problem solving abilities. And I couldn't help but wonder at the same time, was this a product of your upbringing during the Great Depression, where you had to improvise and adapt almost on a daily basis as a function of what the economic realities were, because life was not easy for a big swath of the country during those darkest days of the Depression. And, you didn't have the luxury of mass consumer electronics and automation. So life was much more of a chore. And at the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, gosh, could more current generations be able to think on their feet and adapt as well as some of these older generations have? And I'm sure that we could, but I'm just wondering if the learning curve would be as steep as it was, because, the lessons that you tend to learn the quickest are the ones that are the hardest, and the ones that, really, the ones that are really backed by a huge sense of urgency and, big items that are at stake. But, I'm just wondering if the learning curve was a lot steeper for these guys because they had such a rough upbringing.
There's something my grandmother used to say, and she would always say, if you're on the side of right, you go deeper. And I feel like in something like, especially in World War II, where, are you really going to sit on the sidelines and wait for Hitler to come into our country? Or are you going to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not happening on our turf or anybody else's, and you're going to get in there on the side of right? And I think that our soldiers have that side of right. When we're on the side of right, and I'm looking what's happening today between Ukraine and Russia, and I'm reading like some of the Russian soldiers are like, I don't want to be here.
Yes,
I don't believe in this. So they're not on the side of right. So their military is weaker because of that. And so I think that's a major thing when you read about these people who put themselves way out there. They're heroes because they believe in what they're doing. They're not second guessing why they're in there fighting.
Yeah, they know what they're fighting for.
Exactly.
Is that where you talk about this also in the beginning of the book? Now, this is the greatest generation. That was the name, and I remember Nancy talking to me about that. It wasn't in my high school books in South Africa that I recall, but the greatest generation is that because they stood up and kind of there's like an integrity to it, right? With this war, with everybody that stood on the right. On the right side of things. Let me make that clear.
Exactly. And I know I put that in the book, and the term "the greatest generation" has actually come under a lot of scrutiny. I really put it in there for general purposes because, in a broader sense, I think collectively our culture tends to gravitate towards the term "the greatest generation," as a function of Tom Brokaw's book. And whenever we talk about the World War II generation, that's typically the term that we apply to them. And I certainly think that the term itself has a lot of merit, and it's certainly a term that I think is valid to use. But at the same time, I have to remind myself that there were more than one generation that fought in World War II, because, you had a generation of trigger pullers like my grandfather, who was born in 1922, and then you also had a generation of the top generals like, like MacArthur and Eisenhower, who were born in the late 1800s. So, you have multiple generations who are fighting there. But I think in a broader sense that everyone in the country who mobilized and served in some form or fashion, you can apply the term greatest generation to anyone who was alive and was of age at that point to affect some qualitative difference within the context of the war effort.
It's hard. I know it's like with us with our Love Your Parks tour, which started as the Spirit of America tour, which we changed names. We started with that because the Spirit of America, they said, Ken Burns did his, national park thing, saying it's America's best idea. It was a national parks, service. So a lot of people looked at that. Then they're going, well, wasn't saying no to slavery kind of the best idea. So we had to kind of look at this and go, this may not be the best name. And so there's things in hindsight, but I think the terms and generational names do kind of stick of, we do, as human beings, we need to have something, we do need generalizing terms, generalizations, as for a marker for our brain to know how to file things. We do. And I don't know, like even Mike, as you came on the show, I'm like, I was going to ask one thing about the Pacific Northwest, and you have the whole history. So I don't know how many file markers you have in your brain, but you seem to have a whole bunch of them about what's going on in history, to understand even all the different generations that came in. That is what's interesting about war, though, too. Like I was thinking about Hal Moore. You've written, 3 books on Hal Moore. Is it 3? It is 3, right?
Yeah.
And you are at 22 books now. I'm now trying to get all those markers correct here. But, I was thinking about him today about, he was such an esteemed general, and he did the right thing. He was on, the correct side of the line, let's put it that way, and also took chances, risks, but for the right purpose. Do you think World War II soldiers and generals influenced him? Would if you read your book right now, he would dig all the soldiers in there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, because in a matter of speaking, he was a part of that generation.
Right.
He was at West Point when World War II was going on, and it was there. I think there's at least a 99% probability that if he was not at West Point, then he would have been drafted into the Army. And World War II influenced so many of the points of instruction at the academy during that time, and almost every facet of their training as cadets was geared towards, hey, this is what you're going to need in order to fight the Axis. If you go to Germany or if you go to Japan, this is what you can expect to see, and here's how you will be expected to fight. And, what some of the other veterans have told me, whom I've spoken with over the years, who were either at the academy during those years or they were entering the military in those latter years of World War II. They were saying, look, there was no immediate indication that the war was going to be over by 1945. We really had no idea when it would end, and we certainly weren't counting on the Axis powers to fold by the fall of 1945. So, we all knew that if we were raising our right hand and swearing an oath to defend the country, whether it was 1944 or 1945. Chances are we were going to be fighting a Nazi, or we were going to be fighting an Imperial Japanese soldier at some point in the near future.
Yeah.
So it totally influenced his thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Going through the stories, I'm going, even just, it just seems like a turn for folks going, okay, I'm going to go in and go through the training, and it just seems like a really big, bite of the apple of what the heck did I get myself into? But I'm going for it. And then next thing you know, you are in the war, and it's a mixed bag of people going out there. What was it for you that led you to this story? Not stories, I should say. Let me go try and get these, because they're individual stories. You did have the opportunity to interview some of the gentlemen, and we are at that generation. You even say, really, we're at that end of that cycle, and to get those stories, I think, is really a huge and important thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think what motivated me to do it more than anything was just a sense of urgency, and you can also say a sense of mortality, because I remember when I was growing up in the 90s, we had so many World War II veterans who were still alive. And I saw these guys everywhere. I think most of the World War II veterans at that point were in their late 60s and early 70s. They were all still living. They were very much in great health. And, I mean, I saw them everywhere. I saw them at the grocery stores. They were in the VFW parades. I mean, they were working out at the rec center. You know, but then as I got older, like right around the mid-2000s, that's when the largest percentage of our World War II veterans started to pass away. And then it was a few years later. Now, I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard it on multiple occasions that they started leaving us at the rate of several hundred per day. And by the time 2015, 2016 came around, that's when it became very clear to me, okay, the youngest of the World War II veterans right now are in their late 80s and their early 90s. These men and women are not going to be with us much longer. And, you know, I'm thinking to myself, gosh, how many of them have passed away already who have taken their stories with them? And, you know, how many of them have stories that are written down, you know, that are in a file folder somewhere and really need to see the light of day and have a broader audience, and which ones are still living that I can speak to right now and get their stories down on paper for future generations to benefit from. So what I did in that regard was, you know, I said, okay, well, if I can find any number of veterans out there and any number of their stories, and I can get them collectively down on paper, I can present this as a project that says, here is what normal people did when the chips were down and they had to rise to the occasion. This is somebody who could easily be your neighbor. It could be your uncle. It could even be you in another context, in another time. And when the world was confronted with a problem as great as fascism and the Axis powers, here is how they rose to the occasion. Here's what they did. And we all know the broad arc of World War II, and, you know, we can all talk about it in a macro sense, but at the end user level, here's what it looked like, here's what they experienced, and here's that intimate personal perspective that they bring to the equation. And that's what really motivated me to do it. And while I was working on the project, it also reminded me of something that I had heard from my father a few years back, because when he was a kid growing up in the 60s, a lot of the World War I veterans were still alive. And he remembered, you know, hey, I remember the World War I veterans were all over the place. You know, the World War II veterans were too, but, you know, they were in their 40s at this point. So, you know, there wasn't a sense of urgency that these guys were going to be passing away soon. But, you know, the World War I veterans who were like in their 50s and 60s at this point, you know, they were everywhere and we saw them all over the place. But then by the time the 80s and 90s came around, well, gosh, all the World War I veterans started passing away. And then I think the last living World War I veteran died in either 2011 or 2012. And it was a phenomenon that my dad had commented on. He's like, yeah, there were so many World War I veterans, but then they all started passing away. And you were thinking, gosh, what stories could they have told? And I'm thinking, well, gosh, you know, that's the situation I find myself in. And, I don't want to let good stories like that slip away.
You know, you're really right, because, we lived up in the mountains in San Diego and Julian. There was an American Legion that we hang out with, and we actually did a radio show there a few years back on 4th of July, and it was one of the most moving shows we've ever done. And they created, because of the sound and because they had an event going, they created a bomb shelter for us. That's what they called it, because for the radio show, because at that time we were doing it all by rotary phones. I mean, I can't even explain how we did radio shows, but that's how we did it.
That was crazy.
But, you know, the Legion, you know, our band used to perform there and stuff, but the Legion taught me, it was just a special place. And you're lucky to be allowed in, you know, yet families and friends could go in, but it was this special place. And, you know, they would have breakfasts on Sundays, big pancake breakfasts, and people would show up and volunteer and make, and everything was very structured, very military, right? Very structured, how the breakfast would run, and if they had barbecues, everything was done. And 4th of July was a big deal, and it was like the town had a parade, but at the same time, this Legion was, it was all about this Legion. And when you go hang out in the Legion, you play pool or have a cocktail with someone, they're going to, at that point, and I think back to early 2000,
a lot of stories.
2000, 2001, 2002. Even before that, in the late 1900s, 1999 or around then, we hung out there even earlier. And there were World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans, and then at the same time Gulf War guys in there. And there was this multi-generational thing happening. And you could sit and take it in, because we're not people of service. We are in other ways, but not in military service. And, it was just a beautiful thing to see all generations come together. And then they were talking about how, they try to make their bar more open to the public so that people would be interested in the American Legion. They would throw events because it was almost like as the World War II veterans were passing, that generation was leaving us, that the American Legion was going away, and because we're also at that point with, Vietnam veterans, and so there was this urgency of where do we meet and hang out? It's a hangout place, but it's also
bridge the gap between people who have been in combat and people who haven't been in combat. So they were trying to
keep it alive.
Bridge the gap so that there would be an understanding of what it means to go to war.
But also give a safe space for those who had served. And so there was this balance, like your events, everyone could come, but then, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a special place where people can just be who they are and not have to worry about other people understanding them, and have a free place to talk. Yet at the same time, it's in towns where you don't have a military base. So like in 29 Palms, did they really need that? Yeah, because everybody hung out in the bars too. But it was this special kind of community, and everybody took such care of each other. It was, I don't know, very beautiful. So I think the legions, was that started in World War I, World War II? I mean, I don't know, but there was I remember when we were living there trying to keep it going, especially in smaller towns, because they don't have a support network in small towns, except for a Legion.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so the American Legion and the VFW, those are the two primary hubs for veterans here in the U.S., and, what they accomplish and the camaraderie and the mutual support that they give to each other is really just incredible. I think that, I think that in the early days of the post-World War II era, both the American Legion and the VFW were probably the closest thing to a support group that veterans could find amongst themselves. Because if you think about it, in the immediate post-World War II era, we didn't really have the same level of understanding of PTSD that we do today.
Yeah.
And, we've come a long way in order to make sure that our returning veterans get the emotional and the psychological support that we need. Well, you think about today's mental health system, and it really didn't exist in its current form back then. And I think the closest thing you had to that mutual therapeutic society was what you found in the American Legion, and also what you found in the VFW. So I think that it serves a very far-reaching purpose even today. Not only to ensure that our veterans are recognized and that they have a safe space to share amongst themselves, but that you also get that tertiary benefit of being in the company of people who have shared experiences, and you can support each other in ways that the outside community won't really understand, and, give that additional psychological support to your brethren who really need it.
I found like when in the Legion that some people from World War II veterans were more than happy to tell you their experiences, and they wanted to.
Right.
Vietnam veterans didn't want to say anything, and it was really
that changed up a little bit, though.
Yeah, but I think there's a space of time that has to happen for them to be ready to talk.
Right.
I think they have to process, and before they're talking to somebody they really don't know, it's a stranger. It's one thing talking to another person who's been through what you've been through, as opposed to talking to somebody who has no clue until you tell them. But I think the exchange has to happen so that people at home understand what happens when we go to war. We need to understand what is actually happening to the people who go to war. And it's not about the beauty of somebody got shot and died and then they have a funeral. That is not it. It's about the day-to-day, what happens to them.
The trudgery, the living in the mud.
Yeah.
I was, reading.
So we don't take it so lightly.
I was reading Peter Worth's story, The Battle of Okinawa. I think it's, and it just really got me. That story got me, and I think it also got me too, because we've been to some of the places we've been, but it's just when you think about somebody just kid dead, and next thing you know, off you go. You're a kid. You're 17 years old. Off you go.
Yeah.
And here comes all of the, and then just even what he did with the grenades, like, dude, I did this whole, we play video games, but as I was reading his story, I'm like, his maneuvers were like a video game in a way, but this is someone's real footprint and real life, and having to go for it, and really pulling on his training, which wasn't maybe all that even. You know what I mean? So that story really got me. It just, yeah. I just think about what people go through, and I think that's the beauty of what you're doing with your books, and we say that on every show, is that you're bringing the humanity in for us to understand, because even with what's happening with Ukraine right now and Russia, I just look at these civilians and even Army guys and gals come from this country going over to help. It's you see people just go for it, and there's such bravery, but it's like true, real courage with integrity without the ego,
Right.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. What story, when you were connecting with all these stories, and how did you find a lot of them? Tell us a little bit about that research part and what stories kind of connected with you. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see. I think one of the biggest resources for me was when I moved up here to the Twin Cities area, and I connected with the World War II Roundtable here in Minnesota, and that is a historical society that is run by a retired Army colonel, and their sole purpose is to preserve a lot of the oral histories and a lot of the stories of the local World War II veterans who live here. And it is an amazing program that actually has sponsorship from the Minnesota Historical Society. And every month they have a roundtable discussion that records the stories and the recollections of living World War II veterans. And that's how I was introduced to a lot of the persons who appear in the book. And not only that, the other stories that I've found have been through other historians with whom I've connected, who have taken down their own oral histories and have recorded these interviews and transcribed them and have collected these stories over the years. And it has been just an incredible experience to go through all of these transcripts and to interview some of these veterans themselves, and just to hear what it is they have to say of how they fit into the broader framework of what was the greatest conflict in human history. And there were so many of those stories that connected with me. And not to give too much of a spoiler, but I'm actually planning on making the Combat Diaries into an entire anthology, because there were so many stories that I collected that I really want to get down on paper and have published in the long run. But if I can pinpoint one that really connected to me And, I say that it connected with me because it touched a tender nerve, and it was such a story of tragic irony, was the story of Commando Kelly.
Oh.
Yeah, and for any number of listeners out there who are unfamiliar with who Commando Kelly is, that is his nickname. His given name is Charles Kelly. And, the story of a tragic hero really applies to this man and his life in general, because here was a boy who was born on the wrong side of the tracks, grew up in a very rough neighborhood of Pittsburgh, spent most of his life in and out of juvenile detention, spent most of his childhood as a member of a street gang. And when World War II kicks off, despite his background as a juvenile delinquent, he's accepted for military service and actually becomes an outstanding soldier. He's proven himself in the ranks, and he participates in the Allied invasion of Italy, where he distinguishes himself in combat, essentially becoming a one-man army holding off a superior German force. And, it's like when he runs out of ammunition, firing one weapon, he throws it aside and he picks up the weapon of a dead comrade, and he's just going through multiple automatic rifles, going through regular rifles, bazookas even, and even taking mortar rounds and tapping them on the ground to turn them into makeshift grenades. Well, he distinguishes himself in combat so well that he wins the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he earned every bit of that award. But then to see how he tried to adjust to civilian life afterwards, and the tragically downward trajectory that his life took afterwards, really just breaks your heart, because you can't help but weep for this guy when you say, my God, here was a guy who, went above and beyond the call of duty, and he should never have had that much trouble readjusting to civilian life and, finding long-term viable employment. And you have to think to himself, okay, what did the horrors of combat and his rough upbringing skew his perceptions of reality and skew his ability to properly function in society? And might he have gotten the help he needed had there been some type of mental health apparatus available for veterans in a widespread format? But, it goes to show that, when these veterans come back, I think it's an imperative to make sure that they can properly reintegrate and that they get the proper help that they need and learn how to develop any manner of coping mechanisms afterwards.
Oh, this really, you've reminded me of something. I remember working for a company where the job application specifically asked if you were a veteran of Vietnam. And every time the person said yes, they didn't get the job. I remember that because I remember going through the applications and going, well, this is a weird pattern. And talking to my boss and saying, what's up with this? And he said, because they were all drug addicts. And I'm like, whoa, dude, seriously?
No,
so
see, that's now you can't. That's illegal now, I think. If you think about it,
it was probably illegal then too. But I just remember there's all these prejudices sometimes, and people have the wrong idea because the education isn't there, because everything's hush-hush. When we're at war and in the military, that's why I think your books are so important to bring out. Really, these are people. They're human. They're just, with the word soldier. Should say human soldier, It's like, like, and it's like a chessboard, the soldiers go out, the pawns to go out like that. I think humanizing what's really happening is so important. So we should not be so comfy at home that we forget what's going on. We shouldn't.
Right.
And I just, yeah.
No, it's this. Nancy and I were talking. We would love to see this as like a Netflix series, or
I would love to see this,
or whatever channel anybody wants to watch on that kind of thing. I just, History Channel. I'm just saying, since he's been on the History Channel, hey, everyone, if you missed Mike on the History Channel, go check it out. Go history. I think it's history.org. It has History Channel series. I was there. And he is a featured historian on the episodes of the Johnstown flood of 1889, the Chernobyl disaster, the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Oklahoma City bombing. And so you definitely want to go and watch those if you haven't seen them. And it's just so cool to see Mike out there. I'm like, dude, this is so cool. Yeah. So I'm just saying,
yes,
knock. But this would be great to have out there because I just
see this.
World War II, we don't want to forget it, and I think that it just feels so timely now too with what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. And I just I feel so much for the people of Ukraine, and there's so many brave people doing things, standing up to it. And it kind of feels kind of World War II-ish in a way, doesn't it? And I wasn't there in World War II, but just kind of those stories and people standing up and saying no.
Well, they're asking, protecting their freedom.
Right. I think that's so cool.
Can you imagine what it would be like to have your freedom for years and then suddenly your neighbor decides to take it away?
Right, and I say so cool. I'm not saying it's not a cool situation. I'm saying that, to stand up. I think there's so many people standing up in so many ways. Is such bravery that I just my heart is there with them. But this is a very cool book. Kudos. You've got to feel relieved, right? Another book out, but like this is such a special book. This is, you've been teasing us with stories about the Combat Diaries for the last few months. So how does it feel now that it literally just went out? Do you kind of is it a big sigh? Do you go eat a big, what do you do when a book goes out? How do you celebrate?
Ooh. Oh gosh. I usually take my girls out for an ice cream. I said,
I knew ice cream was involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Lisa, you know me, so.
Ice cream. You know what? First thing I was like, "Ooh, I want some ice cream," but it's kind of cold here.
But wait,
Minnesota. Listen. Go ahead.
I was going to say we know somebody who says ice cream is you cannot go out on a Sunday without having an ice cream cone.
No, you can't.
Right.
He said that's what Sundays are created for.
That's what Sundays are for.
Ice cream. When the sun shines on a Sunday, you're supposed to have ice cream, and
that's right.
We'll not take no for any answer on that. But so everyone, again, go to history.org and watch Mike. Go to Mike-Guardia.com and go get all 22 of his books. It's a great collection. When we were back home and not traveling, we had an entire bookshelf for Mike.
Yeah,
we did, and now the bookshelf is in our storage unit because we're not getting rid of them, because they're good books, really good. And honestly, for libraries, local bookstores, check that out. This World War II affected all of us in some way in our family history. And that's something too. When you're doing stories like this, are you connecting with families, like the descendants of those who fought and the descendants of those who you're writing about?
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, the family members, even of the veterans whom I've spoken to who are still living. Yeah, I mean, I've built those relationships with their family members, and they have been an incredible resource in helping me find a lot of different data points. And hey, we have this photo album here, or hey, here's this one thing that was buried in a file folder, and it's been there for however many years. Maybe it'll be helpful. But yeah, as a matter of fact, throughout most of the projects that I've done, connecting with the family members has been just an incredible experience that I think adds an even richer dimension to the final product. I mean, that was certainly the case when I was working on the books for Hal Moore. You know, I can't thank the Blackburn family enough for all of the help that they gave me when I was putting together Don Blackburn's biography. And yeah, I mean, I consider them you know, I consider them all close personal friends to this day.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
That's cool.
But you're keeping the stories alive, you know, and it's about courage and valor and just really doing the right thing, like Nancy was saying. You know,
I love that you make it personal, because that's what we need. We need to keep things personal.
Yeah, exactly. And as we travel, Mike, you know, we keep going in places like here, and I'm like going, oh my God, here's all the stuff we've talked about with Mike, all the ocean stuff. And then I'm looking at the ocean going, oh my God, they were out there, and that's some rough water, and it's cold and windy, and like this is what they went through. You know, you think about it. You think about what people went through when you stand in a place, you know, a battlefield or a lookout point, even a lookout point. You got to think about the people that were always on the lookout. That's not an easy job. You know what I mean? I think being the lookout, you have to, the watchman, you have to be awake through, you know, and you have a story of a mailman. I mean, we forget about how mail got around in World War II. And so, you know, people like that, you just, you know, there's these jobs that we just don't even realize. In fact, I'd love to do a show on that, like the jobs of the different kinds of jobs in the military. Because I don't think we know, like, you know, so we should do that at one point. But with us traveling, I want to tell you, we are going to be in Minnesota this year. I've said this, we're going or this year, next year, we're going to be doing it a lot. We're doing this, and this is something that started, and I bring this back because we talked about Eisenhower with his big highways, you know, the highway system.
Right.
But there is a highway that goes from Winnipeg to New Orleans that was started in 1915, goes through Minneapolis and Minnesota. And I was just thinking as we were talking, and they're reviving this old highway. This is pre-Route 66 stuff. This is one of the only historic vacation routes that went through the heartland of our country. This is like crazy. It's called the Pines to Palms Highway, and there's all this history that goes with it. And so I think we should do something of the World War II sites as we go through this. We're going to be doing this, covering this highway for years because there's so much to do. But I think, Mike, we're going to be calling on you on this. Like we have a whole new project. I know we're still doing Fremont now. We got all these other generals. I mean, it's just never ending. But I think we should look at some of these World War II stories. Don't you think of? You know, you're talking about the Roundtable. I think we should start looking at some of the World War II stories from, you know, when we come see you, and then as we go down the highway, because it connects back to the Louisiana maneuvers. See what I'm going for? I want to do the Louisiana maneuver.
It's the Jefferson Highway, so in honor of Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
So when you look that up, you can see what cities it goes through and what territories, and it's you know, Route 66 goes to east, west, west, east, but this goes north, south, southwest.
Yeah, and it's north. International because it goes from Winnipeg.
You know,
Oh, and I want to touch on. So World War II, didn't we work with Canadians because they were British too? Like, isn't that? We did. We worked a lot with them, right? So that's another thing. And because when we did our first interview, we're going to be doing a show on the Jefferson Highway. I think it's every fourth Thursday we're doing a Jefferson Highway show as we start to actually go out there and travel. And then I was looking, I mean, I'm zooming in on the map of every place, you know, and of course everybody argued, so there's different paths and everything. Then I got to Alexandria, Louisiana, which is known for, you know, the maneuvers as well, the Louisiana maneuvers training. And then I reminded me of all those, you know, World War II aircraft with them smiling, those tiger faces and smiling shark facey kind of things. Who started that? Like, was that something just for fun, or was that, who started painting the aircraft? Like, where did that come from? We should do a show on this, because even the naming of them, but was that like a tactic, or was that done afterwards? I mean, did they really go into war looking like Jaws? You know, am I?
Yeah. Yeah. So the painting and the naming of aircraft, that's been around for almost as long as aviation itself has been around. You really started to see it more widespread in World War II, not only as a morale booster, but also to really develop a sense of esprit de corps, and to say, okay, well, here we are among the first generations of military fighter pilots, and we are fighting an enemy that we think is qualitatively representing the forces of darkness. So how do we pump ourselves up as the good guys? Well, let's give ourselves some fancy names, and let's paint some iconic images here on the side of the aircraft. And just to add to the sense of camaraderie and the esprit de corps that we feel, let's do what the Navy does with its ships. Let's give these planes some type of colorful nicknames, and we're going to nickname our squadron, like the Flying Bandits or whatever. And let's see how creative that we can be. And I think they took it and they ran with it, and they had a lot of fun with it. And they could certainly get away with a lot more, because back in the 40s, there were no pretenses of political correctness back then. You could be as colorful and even as offensive as you wanted to be, and nobody said a word about it.
No, that's really funny. That brings us to Glen Burroughs. You've been on a show with him over in England, and he always talks about the World War II sites in England. And we're going to do a show with him because he's on every third Saturday, I think. Yeah, every fourth set. I'll get it right, but everyone. Glen Burroughs, go check him out on blendradioandtv.com. And he is coming on his next appearance, and we're excited about this. And I'm going to get it straight so everybody knows. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's every fourth Big Blend Radio. We're doing a whole thing. I said, well, we need to do a show on what we say in the American English versus British English, right?
Yeah.
And he sent me a historic document of what the World War troops, like a guide to what they were allowed to say and do in England. Don't say this. This is how you behave. And it goes into, but at the same time, like, political correctness was not there. So it's very interesting. You should come on that show, Mike. This is going to be so much fun because we're kind of going through this because he was like, well, we've got to go. We can't just do about now when America says apartments and we say flats. He goes, we need to go to World War II. We have to go then because that's when, we were going back more at that point. So it's really cool. It's interesting. I mean, but that's when we talk about world wars, we were all connected in fighting for the rights of people and for the freedom of people that needed it. And I think we're right there again. It's not saying we're in a world war, but with Ukraine and Russia, it's that whole feeling. So I think your book is timely in that you're capturing, an end of an era, and we shouldn't forget it. And we're also, giving stories to what people are doing now as well, even though technology and everything is different. The bravery is bravery, right? And bravery with action is the thing. So very cool, very cool. Military Mike, everyone. Military Mike, Mike Guardia is on our show every first Monday, so keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. And, of course, go to Amazon, go to all those favorite bookstore places you want to go get books. Go get The-Combat-Diaries, True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II, and keep up with Mike at Mike-Guardia.com. He's also on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. Follow him on YouTube, man. He's got all kinds of cool stuff going on there, man. You should, I'm like, dude, you capture all kinds of footage and all. Like, where are you getting this? I'm like, he's got all kinds going on, so you want to follow him there too. But
I got a lot of friends in low places.
No, I'm serious. I'm like, Nancy and I always go, is Mike really part of the Secret Service? No, because he knows so much. Don't answer that. Keep it. Anyway, we're going to close with a song called Beneath a Solemn Sky, and this is from the Gunboat Diplomats, and you can keep up with them at gunboatdiplomats.com. We haven't done live shows with music for a while, so it feels so good to play their music. And what is a gunboat? That is like those are like the ships that go out, like where we are right now, right? With the rowboats with guns on them. Yeah, big old.
Yeah, so it's not. It's a little bit bigger than a skiff, but not as big as a destroyer. So.
So it's like it's an ocean tank, kind of.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually a very good analogy. Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, I like those little caterpillars, and I always go, whenever we see a caterpillar, I'm like, Mike, there's a tank. It's doing something different. All right, here it is, Beneath the Solemn Sky. Thank you so much, Mike. You take care, and we're looking forward to the next segment and hearing what's more on the horizon for your writing. So, everyone, Mike will be back on the first Monday of May, because we're already in April. Here it is, Beneath the Solemn Sky.
Nancy, Lisa, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Always.
By a brown and withered garden, there's a chapel in the sand, where the wicked and the faithful come to make their final stand. As another bitter season ends, now the hour is at hand, for the seeds of hope have fallen on parched and stony ground. Can you hear the prophets calling as the world keeps spinning round? But it all goes with the territory, and for what it's worth, the meek and brave prepare a grave in the dusty, barren earth, while the bones of last week's promises are buried in the square. The saints and doubting Thomases all bow their heads in prayer, but the words will bring no comfort to the foolish or the wise, till the heavens rain on the brittle grain like teardrops from the quiet, solemn sky. Now the thunder clouds are gathering, a shadow on the land. So rejoice, you sons and daughters, but wouldn't it be rich if the holy healing waters soon undermined the bridge, rushing up to breach the levee on that long and fateful day? Till the rising flood made it clear as mud, all the sins are washed away, down the ancient winding river to the dark and briny sea. Now these old foundations shiver at the sacred memory of that brief and blessed moment when Providence supplied a sad lament for the penitent who are damn well sanctified.